I'm Betty Swann. Welcome to our show, Wisdom in the Night, where you get help for those tough decisions in your life. Tonight, I have a great guest. She is a human resource assistant at the United Nations. Welcome, Patricia Pantoja.
Thank you so much, Betty. So
yeah,
glad
it's
to
just
be here.
great to be on the show and to learn about you. I know you have a very unusual background. So where are you from? And tell me all about yourself.
I'm from Colombia.
What part of Colombia?
Bogota, the capital city. I was raised in Bogota, nice family, dad, mom. I have a younger brother. It was a nice childhood. Something happened when I was 14. I had an accident. I fell from a horse and I broke my arm, and it was really bad. My bone came out of my arm and it got infected. I had a few surgeries, and I didn't know this, but the doctors told my parents that I may have to get an amputation. So you can imagine what my family went through, and my mother was also going through a very tough time at the time. They were separating with my father, and she just tried everything. We tried every doctor and all kinds of medicines and healing, and we ended up in a Christian church, which back home was very unusual, not going to a Catholic church. But we went there, and that's where I got to understand God and the gospel and salvation, and I just liked it, and that's where I got to meet Jesus.
So were you about 14 years old when all that happened?
That happened when I was 14, but my last surgery was when I was probably 19.
Oh, 5 years of dealing with that issue.
Yes, and so the doctor at the end said, you're good now, the last surgery will be plastic surgery, and I said no. It's a very large, I don't know if you can see,
oh my goodness,
scar.
It starts like at your elbow and goes
yes,
more
and
than halfway
there's
up.
several scars, and there's one here, but I didn't want any plastic surgery because I felt this was my testimony of how God met me, and you know, He just kept my arm, which, what a blessing.
So did you feel close to God through all of that?
I was always spiritual, but I didn't go to church or read the Bible. So when I started going to this Christian church, I just started discovering, and I just felt like, oh, I finally get this. Like, all
Do
this.
you think some children are more interested or more in tune with spiritual things?
Definitely, I was one of them.
And you were one of those?
Even though we didn't go to church, I mean, my parents were Catholic, but we never went to church. I had a grandma who was close to God. She wanted to be a nun, so she talked to me about God and said psalms to me. So I think because of that, I was always spiritual, even though I didn't know the Bible or.
I was like that. That's why I'm interested in asking you. And do you have brothers and sisters?
One brother, younger brother.
Does he still live in Colombia?
No, he's here.
Oh.
He moved
How
here.
about your mom and dad? Where do they live?
My mother is back home in Bogota, Colombia, and they're separated. They're divorced. My father lives in Costa Rica.
And do your parents come to see you here? Are you here
Yeah,
by
I've
yourself?
seen them. Yes.
I just am
often.
kind of interested because you're really an immigrant, aren't you?
I am.
So let's talk about that.
Okay. So when I was 25, I came to the U.S. I just wanted to have fun for a year, live the New York life, no agenda, just wanted to kind of like take a break. And I did that, and a year went by, my visa was expiring, and I was supposed to go back to my normal life back home, but I couldn't. My family, my parents got separated. My mom was here. I had no place to go. My father was telling me, there's nothing for you to do back home. There are no jobs. Just stay. And that's when my real struggle started because I had no working papers. I just had a visa, and I had to stay. So my whole identity was crushed. My life, what I thought was my life, was over. I was like, I have nothing here. I'm no one here. And that's when I really had to go to God and like help me, like really hold on to whatever He said in the Bible.
So did you read the Bible a lot?
I had to those days.
You had to in order to get answers, right?
At that point, I was so hopeless. I remember I walked by a homeless person, and I thought, I'm so close to be that, not only because of the finances, but because of the hopelessness. Like my whole identity was gone, and also I was dating someone who I made my idol, and I just forgot everything I wanted before. So I was like, no hope, you know? So when I realized I was that low, I just looked up and I said, okay, I really need you. And that's when my relationship with God really got strong. And that's when he said, okay, now you have nothing, and I'm going to show you who you really are and what you really have in me. And that's when I started discovering it. It was a 7-year process. It was really hard. I had to work 2 jobs, go to school to keep a visa, couldn't leave the country, didn't have insurance, kind of lived the immigrant life, the tough immigrant life for 7 years.
You know, there are immigrants watching this show right now, and this show is about wisdom in the night. What would you tell someone who was new to the United States, didn't have the help that they either thought they were going to get, or they just didn't have any help at all, and they came because they were determined to have a better life, but it's really, really a lot harder than they thought? What would you tell that person?
What worked for me, I just couldn't focus on the circumstances. If I looked at those, everything would look very dark and with no hope. I just looked at what God promised. So he said, I have a hope and a future for you. I have plans for you. My grace is all you need, because I was thinking, I have nothing. I have no money. I have no job. I have nowhere to go back to. And he said, I'm sufficient. And,
I'm sufficient?
Yes.
God said, I'm sufficient?
Yes, my grace is sufficient for you. I'll help you go through this, and you'll be okay. And even though everything looked the opposite, I just chose to believe what he said. And
well, now, were you learning that in a church, or was this just personal conversation between you and God?
No, since day one I got to the U.S., I looked for church. That was my #1 thing. Like
Oh,
before
really?
looking for a job, a house, school.
Oh, that was the first thing you
yes.
did?
And yes, someone gave me a contact back home, and I called her, and I just joined her Bible study. And I remember the first time I went there, they said, do you have any prayer requests? And I was, yes, I need a job, I need a school, I need a house. And they were making fun, like, you need everything. And truly, I needed everything. And because of that church, I managed to, you know, besides the faith and God's word, they really were the people that got used for me to make it.
So they were supportive of you?
In every way, Betty. Financially, they helped me so many times. Encouragement. Through one of these people, I got to meet the person who helped me get into the UN. In every way, like that's the other thing I would tell to an immigrant. God will use the community. God will use people around you. I don't think I would do it alone. I would have done it alone. He gave me this support system. He gave me a family here. I was alone. And he gave me this spiritual family that I was closer than my natural family to.
So if you had to do it all over again, would you still do it exactly the same? Would you
Totally.
do anything different?
Yes.
What would you do differently?
I would have had more faith to go for things. I was afraid. I would have, for instance, I took a certificate that would give me a work authorization so that I could find a job that would give me a work visa. And now I'm thinking I could have done a master's or 2, you know, like I could have gone much farther, but I was afraid. I was a little bit afraid. I was a little bit, I mean, God still helped me so much.
Well, so how did you get this job at the UN?
God.
Your whole life is about God, isn't it?
It was God.
Yeah, it's great.
Remember, I mentioned I dated someone who I made my idol, and so when I went back, I said, God, I really need you. I had to let go of this idol, and it was really hard. And I looked for this community I had, and there was one person, one of the deacons, who heard my whole story, who saw me crying so many times. And anyway, when I healed and when I was recovered, someone after church, he was, you know, he was one of those people that you go there to ask for prayer. And there was this girl who had a very similar story, breakup story, broken heart. And he prayed for her, and he said, you know, there is someone I think you should meet, because she went through that. So he called me and he said, you know, I met this girl, why don't you call her? Oh, by the way, she's a recruit at the UN. I recruited at the UN.
Oh,
so
she was a recruiter.
She was a recruiter officer. Wow. And so we became really close. She's like my sister now. We were good friends, but she was a professional. It's not like someone can just say, "Oh yeah, come over." You know, it's not easy to get into the UN.
But I bet you never would have thought a bad breakup would lead you to somebody else who had a bad breakup, and that would lead you to your purpose, God's purpose for you.
Totally.
You'd never think that,
like
would
God,
you?
No, of course not. Like when you go through a trial like that, pain, and you never think of that something good could happen, but that's how God works.
That's what God delights in doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think God delights in taking our messes and turning them into something magnificent.
That's what He does. That's what He does. So she couldn't help me for so many years. We just kept on being friends. I did what I had to do to get into the UN. I took my exams. I passed them, but for 7 years they didn't call me.
Another 7 years?
No, these 7 years.
But I mean, you had 7 years, you had the surgery involved for 5 years, and then you came to the U.S. trying to get life going for you. That was 7 years.
That was the 7 years.
And that's the 7 you were also applying for the UN?
I just applied because it was like a dream, but I never got a call or anything. But a few years after, I met this girl, and I had done everything I could do on my own strength. I went to school, got a certificate, got a work permit, got a job that sponsored my visa, and immigration denied my visa after 1 year of waiting.
Oh my.
And I was like, okay, I really have nothing else to do. I remember when I kind of suspected that it wasn't going to happen, I just said, God, I promise I'm not going to cry and I'm not going to get desperate. I know you're going to do something. They said no, and I was like, it's been 7 years. I did everything I could have done, right? And then she called me like 2 months after, and she said, I have an opening, apply. And that job I was doing that I was so miserable, I was like, why am I here? This is not my calling. This is not what I want. God, why did you put me here? Give me all the skills I needed for the UN job.
The job that you were in prepared you. You know, now that is another piece of wisdom that I have learned too, that sometimes you have to take a job and you think, what's the point of this? I don't want to do this. This isn't my calling. And yet you still feel like you're supposed to take that job. Then you get in the job and you learn the things that prepare you for where you're really going. And if you hadn't taken that job, you wouldn't be prepared.
No.
Would you agree with that?
Fully. I mean, like that interview, everything I was doing matched the job description.
Actually leading you to the place that you really, really wanted to be at, that you thought you could never get to.
I'll tell you something super interesting. During this season that I was struggling, I was spending so much time with God because that's all I had, right? I would spend 2 hours in the Word and meditating. One day, I just read a verse and just spoke to me, and it was about a 7-year trial, and that He would change things for me at the 7th year. It was like that, Betty. At the 7th year, I got the UN job, which meant a visa, which wasn't any visa. It was a diplomatic visa. The immigration officer at the airport would say, welcome to America, with my Colombian passport. That doesn't happen, right? I had insurance. Remember, I couldn't travel for 7 years. I was stuck in the UN. I could not go see my father, my grandmother, who was sick. I got to go to see them.
After you got on with the UN?
Yes, I got to go to 7 countries that year, and I got my big dream, which was getting married. Everything during that, you know, that period, that's after the 7th year.
Wow.
Within a year. It was like He completely you know.
Have you ever noticed that you can wait and wait and wait on God, and it seems like it's never going to happen, and then when He's ready for it to happen, it's like dominoes falling.
Yes,
Just,
that's how it
I
happened.
mean, like, how did that happen? It's
How-
so fast.
That's
Would you
how-
agree with that?
That's how it
I've
happened.
happened to me. Yeah, well, now what do you actually do at the UN?
So when I started working for the peacekeeping missions, and I was recruiting people for the peacekeeping missions in East Africa. So I actually, after 2 months of,
In East Africa?
yes,
That's
after,
where I was working in East Africa for 11 years.
okay.
Yeah, not living there, but going every year working.
After 2 months, I had to go there to Sudan. I was recruiting for the mission in Darfur when the UN had just started the mission there. And I mean, you know, just imagine 7 years of not being able to go anywhere, and then God sends me to Africa, which was like a dream. So it was good. It was what I wanted. During those 7 years, God also showed me what I was designed. Before, I didn't know. I studied what my parents studied. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I was good at. So during that time, the church got me or helped me to get into career counseling, and I discovered what was what were my skills, what were my interests, and both of them were the same, the top two, international and helping people. So the UN was like the perfect combination, humanitarian, international. So I was so happy there. And now I'm working in the IT office, so it doesn't feel like that. But I know my purpose wasn't just to get a visa or a insurance or all the nice benefits the UN offers, but something else. So I knew I had to spread God's love there. And so right now that's what I do. On top of my job, I have a Bible study. I lead a Bible study weekly there, and there are many people that know I'm a believer. And
now, is this the Bible study you've had me teach at?
yes.
That you thought of that Bible study. You set that up. I didn't realize that.
Not that one, but I set some others up. This one, my colleague and friend from church, Tina, started it, but now I'm leading it.
Oh, okay. And so what do you feel like you give to the UN?
Itself, the UN itself. You know, I'm always thinking spiritually. I think I bring the love of Jesus in that place, the hope.
And the light, maybe the light of God?
The light of God, yes,
Yeah.
the hope. And I'll pray for, I mean, our prayers can be so powerful and really influence so much. So I pray regularly for every country represented there, for the leaders to have the wisdom to seek real peace, and you know what that means. So it's a place of big influence and spiritual influence.
So it's almost like God has you in a situation where you're called to see what's really going on, what the needs really are, and then He has you pray specifically for the situations and the people, individuals. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
That's great.
I'm definitely very aware of what's going on in the world, and it invites you to pray much more because you see so much suffering and so much injustice.
Also, do you see a lot of immigrant work through the UN? I mean, you're very aware of immigrants
Not
in
really.
the world today. You know, there's just so much.
Oh, yes, yes, of course,
you
but
do?
not my work directly.
No,
but,
not your work directly,
yes,
but you're
yes.
very aware of it.
We know what's happening
It's
in
a
the world.
big situation all over the world.
All over.
I was learning today, for sure, France and Germany have taken in more immigrants than anybody else.
Wow.
I think that's unusual. I don't think people realize that. That's very generous. It's taking on a lot of people's problems, which you understand because, as you said, you are here with all kinds of problems, and they're like that.
Yes, but I think even if they take you in, you still feel like an immigrant, like you don't belong. You may feel like that because of the circumstances. And one verse that really, really helped me overcome that was the one that says that we are citizens. We're not citizens of this world, but citizens of heaven. So that took off, you know, what I would feel if I would feel like I wasn't welcome or I wasn't a citizen of this country. That really helped me. I hope that could help someone.
And you got married after you got here, right?
Yeah, after the 7 years of trial, and one of the big blessings.
How did you meet him?
God again.
Yep. That's really what happens when a person walks with God all the time. You pray about everything. You seek the Lord about everything. And let me ask you something. I know I'm going to ask you in a minute what are some of the challenges you've encountered in your life, but would you say, even counting challenges maybe you've encountered, would you say that you think your life has gone a whole lot smoother because you've tried to live your life by the Bible, what the Bible teaches, the wisdom that's in it?
Definitely. And it's not only that it's smoother, circumstantially smoother, but it's peaceful. So no matter the circumstances, God says that He can give us that peace that surpasses understanding, no matter what. So even though I was going through those 7-year trial, working 2 jobs, going to school, working in the Upper West Side, and my house was, my apartment was all the way in Brooklyn. It would take me an hour and 15 minutes to get home. People would still ask me, and that's how I met my husband. They would be like, why are you, like, what is it in you? You're so peaceful and you're always smiling. So I think that's what it is. It's like, it's not just that He makes it smooth in the circumstances, even though it does happen, but even in bad circumstances, you can have peace, you can have joy. And I think that's the best.
What kind of challenges have you encountered?
The circumstances that I had as an immigrant with I had my tourist visa, but I didn't have, then
so
I had
all
to
that
turn,
you went through just getting established here.
Yes, not having insurance, so if you get sick, what happens? And all the fears that come out of that, right? Like, what if I get sick? If something happens to me, I don't have insurance, and how do you pay those bills, right?
Right.
Especially I didn't have a professional job. And
I think you're talking about real life that just about anybody watching this show can understand and identify with what you're saying. Now, I know you're also interested in being involved in different church ministries, right? And are you helping start a new church, or what is all of that?
Yes, God also showed me that one of my big passions was women and ministering women. So that's what I did back then during the challenge, and I just been very involved in women's ministry. And right now, it's mostly my husband's calling to start a Spanish church in New York.
Is he Colombian also?
He's Argentinian.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So he was actually the one who connected the people so that this dream could happen. And I just asked God if this was, where we should go, and He said yes. And right now we're part of the team that's launching this church. So I'm sure this will help many people, immigrants or people who just come here that do not speak English and really need
so it'll be
that support. Spanish-speaking
church.
only.
And what's it going to be called?
It's part of our church right now. That's Every Nation, NYC, and it's going to be a branch of it.
All right, so Every Nation, if somebody wanted to learn about it, they would go to everynationyc.org.
That's where you go.
And they would be able to learn about that church.
Yes.
Well, you probably would like people to come and help you build that church, wouldn't you?
We need that.
Yeah,
we need that.
families.
We're waiting for that. Yes. But we just want for people to be blessed and to get to know Jesus and to get to know this amazing life that He offers.
Yes. If you were going to give advice to a young woman, not necessarily an immigrant, just a regular young woman that had some experiences that were more worldly or more where they kind of left a bad taste in her mouth, but now she was hungry for God. What would you advise? What would you tell her to do first?
Pray.
And what would she pray?
She would say, I need help. Point me to the right direction. And I'm actually also, I just got involved in a women's ministry in New York because we realized that there's so many people and there's so many Christians, but these women are so isolated that even though we're so many, we're so lonely. Like we're so alone in our spirituality. So to seek for those ministries, there are there. Other women, I mean, we all go through different things and we share and you feel you're not alone. So to get involved in a women's ministry probably, and to look for community. Community is so important to encourage you and also to open the Bible because every single promise is there for them.
Do you read the Bible every day?
Yes.
And how do you read it? I think people will be watching it saying, what do you do? Where do you read that makes you want to read every day? How do you actually do that?
I recently changed that. I went to a women's retreat and they had this 90-day reading the Bible in 90 days. So I couldn't catch up with that because I have 3 little ones and a husband. It's very hard. It takes about an hour and a half and I don't have that time. But it definitely got me into the rhythm. So I just started reading the Bible from Genesis, and I'm just going in order. But for someone who has never read the Bible, I would say Psalms and Ecclesiastes, you call it in English, because there's so many promises and so much like advice that you can take from those. I remember I really read those when I was going through the trial.
Well, I'll tell you, this has been very interesting. And for those of you that are an immigrant or you're a young woman and you're thinking, is it really possible to walk with God and have God lead you through the difficult times, even when you can't see the answers? Yes, it is. And Patricia has proved it, doing it regularly, even working at the United Nations, looking for ways to help people. You can do it too. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. It wasn't an accident that you turned on the TV tonight. And I hope you received some wisdom and that you have a great rest of the night, whether you're going to sleep or you're going to work. I'll see you next time. Bye. Hello, I'm Betty Swann, the woman who interviews people on the show. I want to tell you about something we're doing that you might want to be a part of. Feeding people with pennies and small change you find. The exchange rate makes them valuable. I saved $3.22, told my friends on social media, and they shared it. $215,000 has come in, 100% goes for food. We've fed people in 21 countries. Come help us.